Hello, hello, my friends. I'm Holly Elissa Bruno, and I'm with you on this Monday in June. And I'm so glad to be with you. Usually, I'm accompanied by friends, fellow travelers, people who are also trauma survivors, like Denise Rokicki from um, from Ohio, who cannot be with us this week. And if you were here last week, we talked about what happens when one of us gets severely traumatized. Denise was very open about being traumatized by a hacker who got into her systems and messed with her identity, messed with her safety. I mean, she felt truly violated. And we talked about that last week. And here's what this program is about, my friends. We who live today, 2025, have lived into 2025 from a lot of previous years. And the truth is, many of us survived abysmal experiences, which were so life threatening and so threatening to our souls and our spirits, if not to our bodies, that our brains were affected. And our brains were affected. I'll talk with you about my brain. My brain was affected so that it can just plain shut down. It can flatline. I'll be in the middle of talking about something and my brain will just flatline. It's just as if it's like you know how little kids can be in when we used to take them to banks and we used to, like we used to have to wait in line in banks. That doesn't happen much anymore. But just picture a little child in a grocery store, does not want to be standing up, doesn't want to be there, and just goes, as a friend of mine, now deceased, Otto Kroger would say, just goes on a plots. The child just goes, oh, and lies on the ground, and everybody's looking. And we're looking and thinking, who's abusing this child that's on the ground here, like kicking and screaming, or who's abusing where's the parent? Where's the adult that should be taking care of this child? What I want to say to you is that that's what this program is about. Trauma survivors walking each other home. How on earth do we help each other through all the experiences, all the everyday experiences where our lives are not our lives because all of this, what psychologists call conflation, all of this past history comes around and starts overtaking us and shadows us out. And it's hard to be who we are because we are so reminded of who we were. And here's the deal about the brain. When I am reminded of trauma that's really scary, not only can I not think straight, not only does the part of my brain that can sort things out and see things and have perspective, have humor, all of that, the executive function, the prefrontal cortex, not only does that lose its energy, but what takes over is this part of my brain that many of you have heard of called the amygdala. And the amygdala just pushes out, tells my body to get geared up for a fight. So it pushes out adrenaline. And then I'm having trouble breathing, or it pushes out cortisol, and then I feel like really down. It pushes out whatever it's going to push out to help me survive. But what helped me when I was a child and I had to escape from a threatening situation, which happened with me a lot, didn't help, doesn't help when I'm adult and my brain is still flushing out the same enzymes, the same chemicals to tell me to run. If I'm in the middle of giving a keynote address to 1,000 people and something happens with my brain where I can't think anymore, I just forget what I'm talking about. Now that's normal for a lot of people, right? We forget what we're talking about, but for a trauma survivor like me, if I forget what I'm talking about, that can trigger all kinds of other responses, like you're going crazy, just like your mother went crazy. But no one ever talked about it, so that made that secret even more powerful. But my job was to take care of my mother. She was psychotic. She was split off from herself. No one talked about it. It became even more heavy, even more squeezing on my ability to breathe. Ah, um, Another thing is the factor that comes to me as a trauma survivor is I had two grandmothers. I never was allowed to meet one of them. Adolorata Modelo Bruno, married at 18, gave birth to her first child at 18, 9 months after she was married, of course. That's important in those days. But then she just kept being pregnant. And she was pregnant 14 times at least, and only 8 of those children lived. So she was put in a mental institution. And back in the day, they were called insane asylums. My other grandmother, my mother's mother, was put in a place called Gowanda. And Gowanda was another state insane asylum in New York State. And what happened with both of my grandmothers was that they were given, I don't think they chose it, they were just given shock treatment to calm them down. So I'm talking about something that's pretty joyous, which is I love speaking. I get scared, but I love speaking with large groups, and I love speaking with them about things that they can celebrate about themselves, about strengths and skills that they don't know that they already have, but we can put names and research on that. For example, emotional intelligence is something that not everybody has. It's the ability to read people as well as we read books, right? We think everybody's got it. Not true. Not true. How many of you have had a teacher or a professor, all kinds of degrees, maybe from really prestigious organizations, and can't communicate? So you've got Dr. So-and-so who can't communicate with Ms. or Mr. So-and-so. And then what good is it if there's no connection? Because life is about connection. Emotional intelligence allows us to make human connections with each other. And human connection is profound because it's never just about one person. It's about me. But it's about me and that space between you and me. What do you bring to the space? What do I want and need to see about you so I can welcome you to that space between us? What do I choose to share about myself so that you can feel me? All of these things. I mean, look, one study says 93% of the emotion we communicate is done without words. So nonverbal is the way. It's like, that is normal. I don't like to use the word normal, but the way we communicate is so much of energy, so much of glances, so much of posture, so much of tone of voice, so much of what we look in our eyes. What are we communicating through our eyes? What are we communicating with our eyebrows? What are we communicating with our gestures? So much of communicating is done by picking up messages from other people. And what if we're from different cultures? What if we were from different genders, gender identities? We pick up different things. And then the connection, which is going to hopefully spark understanding and some kind of joy, or at least comfort in being together. If we don't connect, then begins the wars. Then begins the horribleness. So I'm saying to you that much as I love working with groups of people, I was just in Boston, Massachusetts, keynoting to all of the wonderful workers in early childhood in the whole Boston area, in the suburbs and in the city. And we were in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and it was brilliant. I loved it. And so what if in the middle of all of that, I can't remember what I'm going to talk about? And I'm very connected with the audience. So whatever comes to me in the moment that seems appropriate, I filter it and I say, well, is this appropriate thing to say? And if it is, I go with it. And I interact right there with the audience. I was like, our topic was hats off to you. You're an everyday miracle worker in children's and families' lives. And you get called a glorified babysitter. And you get called stuff like, oh, it must be great to get paid for playing with children. I mean, let's face it, an early childhood, infant teacher, preschool teacher, a lot of people in the world don't begin to understand how important these people are, how important their understanding of brain development is. And even without an understanding of brain development, how crucial it is that a child comes to the earth and feels seen. In my writing about trauma and recovery, I'm really clear that each one of us, child, adult, child inside the adult, needs to be seen, needs to be heard, and yes, needs to be believed. The rule in dysfunctional families for trauma, when we experience trauma as children, the message we get, according to Dr. Claudia Black, is don't you dare talk. Don't you tell anybody what's going on. Don't you trust anybody. But the message behind that is don't trust anybody outside of this family. But Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, said, hey, the real war is at home. So the people that are abusing each other are known to each other. So when we're told, don't you trust anybody, don't you take your dirty linen out there, you'll hear it coming and going if you do. What they're saying is you can only trust people in the family. And when people in the family are our abusers, how can we trust? So we're being told, don't tell anybody. Don't trust anybody outside the family. And the last thing we're told, according to Dr. Black, is don't feel. And guys, I'm going to be 80 years old in just a little over 6 months. And I have chosen, as an adult with decades on this earth, I have chosen to get in touch with how I feel. Why? Because that rule, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, was what I grew up on. My older sister, Karen, who died early, 74, Karen was, she died of an autoimmune disease. And if you know about trauma survivors, you probably know about ACEs. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. I hope I'm doing that right. Adverse Childhood Experiences, whichever. Hebrew or whatever, Anyway, adverse childhood experiences are factors that we have experienced, traumatizing factors we experience as children that affect us the rest of our lives unless we get help. And once again, in the last 2 days, I spoke with a woman who really is well-intended. I mean, she loves helping children. She's very skilled as a manager. She's very skilled as a leader. And what she was saying to me was, if we don't get to those children between 0 and 5, we don't get to them. I wrote an article called, We Are So Much More Than Our ACEs Scores, because I got so angry after years of hearing that there was no healing for those of us with high ACEs scores. My ACEs scores pretty high, 8 out of 10. You got 4 or more, you're hurting. 8 out of 10. And I did not get help. I didn't get help until I was maybe 11 years old. I got no help. I was not seen. I was not heard. I was in a household where beating of children was just fine. My father had a belt and had a belt buckle and spare the child. No, honey, he did not spare the child with that belt buckle. I felt the belt buckle. I felt it. I felt it when he pounded me and pummeled me so badly that I blacked out. And a child blacking out doesn't know. I didn't know. Would I survive this? Would this be the end of my life? I didn't know. I didn't know. And the other message for children who are traumatized is you're going to be alone. There's nobody who's going to care about you. You're going to have to do it yourself. And those fingers like shame, shame, shame. You ought to be ashamed. Words like you ought to be ashamed of yourself. What's wrong with you? Can't you get anything right? I heard those over and over again until they became my inner voice. My inner voice. And then the worst. And I want to say what Denise and I always do is to advise people, if you're part of this program, we invite you to do is have some water. Have some water ready to drink and have your iPhone available also. So you can punch in trauma warm lines, because almost every state or adjacent states that you can call up have trauma warm lines. And what that means is there is help available for you and for me. If I were to get triggered right now, I could look up a trauma warm line. I'm in Massachusetts, so I could use one of those. Or if I'm traveling, like if I'm in Tennessee and Tennessee doesn't have a warm line, which may be the case, I can call Cincinnati. If I'm in West Virginia, there are warm lines there. But if I can't find one and I'm not getting the service, I can actually even text warm lines in some places. Well, why would I do this? Because warm lines are sanctuaries for trauma survivors. A warm line is a place we can call or we can text and say, I'm really hurting. It doesn't have to be a crisis like I feel suicidal. It doesn't have to be I'm at wit's end, or I'm just going to go crazy if I don't talk with somebody. No, it can be the agonizing pain of unworthiness, which I feel a lot. It's what I was taught. I was taught I was not worth a thing. I had no worth. And that was why. Oh, and so back to the warm line, before I leave that, you can call a warm line and you won't get a therapist who's going to analyze you. What you'll and that could be a good thing. Maybe that's what you need. There are lists of therapists who specialize in trauma that you might want to find. Psychology Today has those lists, but there are lots of other lists. However, a warm line is a place where you're going to connect with people who are also trauma survivors. We also know, and we're also trained in how to be with someone who needs to share. I'm hurting right now. And the first thing is that person does not need to be judged. Walt Whitman, American poet, late 19th century, early 20th, wrote Leaves of Grass, and he said 4 words that stay with me. In fact, I know educators that put it on t-shirts. He said, be curious, not judgmental. Isn't that what we need? That's what I need. I mean, I'm 79. How long will I live? My father lived to be just short of 101. I couldn't live for a long time. My other sister, who had what happens to a lot of survivors, she got a chronic progressive autoimmune disease that took her life. She could have gone on for years, but it took her life. That's what high ACEs scores do. They affect our lives so much that we don't live that long. People with high scores who experience a lot of trauma, we don't live that long. We get crucially harmful diseases, like I have heart disease, runs in my family. That's typical because abuse. Trauma runs in families too, right? Epigenetics, it's inherited. You know, the studies on children of Nazi concentration camp survivors. Those children, even if their parents didn't talk about it, and a lot of times parents don't want to talk about it. They want to just hope that it goes away, which it doesn't. But the children inherit the propinquity, the likelihood of having high anxiety, of having panic disorder, of having all kinds of autoimmune issues, of having a lack of comfort on the earth, a lack of feeling welcomed on the earth. So, my friends, trauma is something most people don't want to talk about. Wouldn't it be nice to just say, oh, it's great, I'm good, I'm happy, nothing wrong with me? As I have been told and told myself, or my sisters have told we are each other, it's in the past, get over it. Or you know what, we faced that, we overcame that, we're better for it. Or just like bygones be bygones. So I have studied this up the wazoo. Is it wise to just say, let it go, let it go, let it go? And in 12-step programs, we talk about the rest of that phrase, let go, is let go and let God. So there's something divine. In the Catholic Church, the phrase was offer it up, give your suffering. Don't dwell on your suffering, give it up. Here's what I have learned, my friends. If I don't acknowledge and articulate, well, first thing is to acknowledge, is to feel all of the stuff that was stuffed down inside of me, the crazy feelings, the insanity, the thought that I'll be crazy like my grandmothers, that I'll be crazy like my mother, the fear that I will be annihilated, the fear that I will be humiliated, the fear that I will look stupid, the fear that I will be as stupid as my father told me I was, the fear that I will be punished, that I will black out, the fear that I won't live. All of those fears stuffed down inside of me so I could present a face to the world of, I'm okay. I'm really okay. It's okay. Oh, it's just in the past. We're letting bygones be bygones. So here's what I've learned, my friends. Unless I have a way of healing, exposing to the light, when I'm ready, being able to express, including to articulate those things that happened to me, that harmed me, that shut me down, that taught me I'm worthless, unless I have a chance to put those out in the sunlight, to dry out those awful, awful wounds and the abscesses that come because wounds are not, they're covered up. Unless I get a chance to release that and talk about it and be heard as I talk about it, it's gonna bring me down. It's going to bring me down, according to the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. It's going to bring me down with diseases. So my family has heart disease. We also have cancer. Those are two common survivor of trauma diseases. Another one is lung disease. We can't breathe. Were you as a trauma survivor, or do you know someone as a trauma survivor who was taught, hold your breath? There are many times in my life, not so much anymore, but many times in my life when I realized I'm not breathing. Why? Because a way a trauma survivor made it through was to be made it through an impossible, annihilating time. Like when my father, who was a narcissist, he could only see himself and his own needs. I mean, he looked good to the world. He worked hard. He brought home the bacon. He built the house. He provided us with the necessities. That was what he was a son of immigrants. That's what a good Sicilian immigrant son did. You got a wife. You had kids. You built a house. You fed them. You were a good provider. Beyond that, in my family, not much else. You didn't have to comfort. You didn't have to soothe. You didn't have to listen. You didn't have to encourage people. You didn't have to help them grow up. You just gave them a place to be, and that was it. That was it. When it came time to go to college, and all of my sisters and I did well. We didn't have a choice. I'm laughing. It was sad. I didn't have a choice. I had to get good grades. Otherwise, I would have shamed the family. And my purpose was that they let me know. My purpose was to bring them glory, make them look good, not me. I would be smacked around, shamed if I felt good about myself. I wasn't supposed to do that, but I was supposed to help them look good. So helping them look good meant I couldn't fail. I couldn't fail. Well, I did fail, but I had to cover it up, or I had to like work really hard until I got everything so it looked good again. Appearance was everything to a trauma survivor. Appearance to my family was everything. We had to look like we were good people, good citizens, not asking for much, being of service, not imposing ourselves, not being outstanding. That was the message to the three daughters in the household where I was raised. Don't rock the boat. Don't bring attention to yourself. Always help the man feel good about himself. Always help other people. You're not important. You're only important to the extent you can help other people. You know, I've said this before, and I'm saying it again. I mean, my family, the three of us daughters have 2 PhDs, 3 master's degrees, 2 Juris Doctorates, 1 MD, and one of us became a psychiatrist. All of these advanced degrees. Why? Because as one of my sisters articulated, she said, the only time I felt loved was when I was walking across the stage and getting a diploma. I got that. So one time that we were applauded. But when we walked off the stage, then it was time for something else that we had to achieve. So we just kept going to school. We just kept going to school. When I finished my baccalaureate, I wanted to do something badly. I wanted to go in the Peace Corps. I graduated in 1967. I think I was 20 or 21 years old, and I wanted to go in. I think I was 21. I wanted to go in the Peace Corps. I wanted to go in the Peace Corps. But 2 things happened. One, I believed if I went in the Peace Corps, I believed people when they said to me, you've got to go immediately to graduate school or you won't do it. If you put it off, you won't do it. And I didn't know if that was true, but it scared me enough because I was susceptible to being scared. That's how I was motivated, by fear of annihilation. So I said, okay, I got to go to graduate school. So I did. But the other thing that I rarely admit is this. Back in the day, to get into the Peace Corps, there were rigorous physical tests you had to have. And one of them, I believe, was to be thrown into a river or some kind of body of water and have to survive. Now, I was a great swimmer. I was a certified lifesaver. I had the life-saving badge. I was a lifeguard. However, as a panic survivor, not knowing I was a trauma survivor, but with panic attacks, I would fear if I got out in the middle of a lake, if I had a panic attack, which meant I couldn't breathe, I would choke to death and go underwater. I would not be able to breathe and I would die. To this day, unless I'm feeling particularly strong, to swim out in the middle of a lake, I take something with me. I take a noodle. I take something that I can hold on to if I need to. Because that fear, that panic could overtake me at any point. And panic is simply the brain flatlining into total terror. And that's what I was raised with, total terror. Total terror is inevitable. When my father came into my room at night, and this is what I haven't mentioned, but besides taking care of yourself, when I mention things like this with water, it was breathing, it was rolling back your shoulders, and again, and again. Another way to take care of yourself is to remind myself, as Denise says, I am here. I am safe. The trauma that came to me as a child when I could not defend myself is not coming here now. I own my own condominium. I can look out at the sun and the trees. I can look at the flower gardens that I have planted. I can look at the moon at night and feel safe. However, a trauma surviving child who becomes a trauma surviving adult is never safe, never totally safe, because the fear that got crammed and jammed down into us is always there. And that fear, when it comes out, can be overwhelming and can overtake us. So what I haven't said is I am also a survivor of incest. No one talks about this. I am the only one of my sisters to talk about this, that I am an incest survivor. And I am. And it took me decades to be able to own that. And it wasn't as if I had memories of like, oh, I remember this. I got snippets of memories, a smell, a sound, a feeling, a sense of a man standing over my crib, a memory of, didn't know it at the time, dissociating from my body. So when I was forced to do actions with my child, my hands and my little girl's mouth, when I was forced to do things, I left my body and I somehow made it out through the window. This is all in my imagination. Made it out through the window, even in the coldest of midwinter. And I floated up to the moon, where I could sit on the moon and rest a bit. And then I would float on up to heaven, where there would be in my imagination angels playing harps and violins and singing. They were so glad to see me. At last in my life, someone was glad to see me. Why do I say that? Because my father hated me so much. Why would a father hate a child? Because he was supposed to have a son, and I was the last child he could have. And when he learned I was a daughter, not a son, I hear all kinds of things, like he did not come to the hospital. He went out and got drunk. My mother was off in a haze back in the day, in 1945, when I was born. They just gave women all these drugs and babies came out, but the women didn't know many of them didn't know what they were doing. So my mother was already psychotic. And then she's going through this life-death experience of giving birth. She wasn't there. Nobody was there for me. Nobody welcomed me. My father, instead, when he would come home and see me in a high chair or see me at the dinner table, he would yell to my mother, "Get her out of my sight." And I remember that house, that apartment that we lived in, Nellie Scully's house. We had the first floor, and there was a pantry that wasn't heated, and it was off the kitchen. And he would yell, "Get her out of my sight." He couldn't stand the look of me. Why? Because I wasn't a boy. And two, because I was the dark, look at me, dark eyes. It was dark hair under here, dark skin in the summertime. I'm brown as a berry. And of course I am. My 50% of my heritage is from the island of Sicily. Sicily, 70 miles from Africa, when I had my DNA done. Nigerian, Sierra Leone, Ghana. That's where my DNA is from. So of course I was dark. Now I had a mother who was blonde and blue-eyed. My two older sisters took more after her. They were fairer. We all got brown eyes, but their eyes were, I was the dark one. So when my father would look at me, especially when I was tanned, he would hate me because I reminded him of his failure, one, to have a son, and two, of the horrible ethnicity. And why was it horrible to be Sicilian? Because in the 1930 census, the year my father went off to college because he was a scholarship boy to Cornell University Engineering School, the year that he went off to college, what happened? The census takers came around, because they come around every decade, or they used to. Who knows what's happening with the government now? That's a whole other sadness. However, in 1930, the census takers came around, And in my father's family, and my father's family lived in the Sicilian ghetto of Rochester, New York. And the census takers came around and said, Bruno, Bruno, Negro, Negro, Negro. When my father went off to Cornell as a scholarship boy, my image, he would never talk about this. He made up a lot of stories. My parents lied. It was hard to know what the truth was. Like, for example, he lied about being on the rowing team, the crew. He lied about that. I didn't find that out until I was in graduate school, and I was with a graduate school friend named Barbara Butterworth. We were in a women's consciousness raising group together. And I said, yeah, your father was at Cornell in 1934. That's when my father graduated from Cornell Engineering School. No kidding, my father was. So I said, they must have known each other. She checked with her father. I never met my father. I said, they must have known each other because if your father was on the crew team and my father was on the crew team, it didn't matter how many people were at Cornell at the time, they had to have known each other. So Barbara Butterworth went to her father and said, did you know James Bruner? Of course, my father's name at the time was Vincenzo Bruno. But did you know a man named Bruno who was on the crew? And her father said, no, there was no Bruno on the crew. And there I was. I think the old saying is egg on your face. But there it was again, my father having lied, my mother having lied. They told us we were German. They made up a story that we were from the Alsace-Lorraine, which meant part German, part French, because that was more acceptable. Isn't it strange that even after Nazism and World War II, it was more acceptable to my parents to be seen as having, and my mother used to say this, scary as it was, you know what she was saying? She said, you come from good stock. That's Hitler. My mother was part German, and the other part was allegedly, we don't know, Scottish, Irish, but part German. Schultz. My father was pure Sicilian. Grandfather, Migueli Bruno. Grandmother, Adolorata Modello Bruno. He changed his name while he was at Cornell by adding a W, Bruno. Perhaps it would be safer to even appear to be of I don't know, maybe Slavic descent than it was of Italian descent, especially Southern Italian descent. I mean, he was from the time of Sacco Vanzetti. Sacco and Vanzetti were accused of these crimes that they probably, I think they didn't do, but they were killed for that. He didn't want to be Italian. He didn't want to be Southern Italian. And so my father started changing his name. And then he finally did. When I was born Holly Elissa Bruno. First thing I did is when I graduated from law school, go and became a lawyer in the state of Maine, go back with help and change my name to my name, reclaiming my name. My father was enraged about that. My mother would never accept that. When I got married, I never changed my name. Put that in a contract, announced that at the wedding. He was not going to change his name. I was not going to change my name. Our children would have hyphenated last names. We both had our identities. We both had our work. So what happened the first time I visited my husband's family, his mother said to me, hello, Mrs. And what did my mother do? Sent me letters to Mrs. The annihilation came in subtle ways. The annihilation of identity came in overt ways. The annihilation of spirit came in all kinds of ways. The annihilation of who we are was the message of our traumatizing families. Thou shalt not have an identity. Thou shalt not have a personality. The only personality and identity you can have is as a member of this clan. And if you're a female member of this clan, you have to be a servant to this clan. I wrote in my book, Happiness is Running Through the Streets to Find You, Translating Trauma's Harsh Legacy into Healing. Exchange Press, Lincoln, Nebraska. It's actually worth a read, this book. And it's beautifully, beautifully put together. The artist people really got it right. Anyway, it took me decades to feel like happiness was mine. I could be happy because my family's message was, number one, you don't exist. Number two, if you exist, you're here to be a servant. Number three, a man's home is his castle. If he wants to beat you, if he wants to incest you, if he wants to rape you, if he wants to not give you any money, if he wants to starve you, whatever he wants to do, shame you, laugh at you, that's his. Even the Supreme Court, I'm a recovering attorney, my friends. It's one of the ways I tried to gain an identity, to understand what is justice, what is fairness. And I learned a lot, not what law school needed me to learn, but what I needed to learn about justice and fairness. I learned that justice, as we used to say in law school, is just us. If you're privileged, you got money, you got power. You're going to keep the power. If you don't have power and don't have privilege, then you might want to work on things like the 14th Amendment to be sure that everybody has a voice, that due process is guaranteed to everybody. But I tell you, I learned that there's a big difference between a right and a privilege. And anyone who's not privileged has very few rights. Women. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Did we not work hard to pass the Women's Rights Amendment? Did it fail? Yes, it did. Sure, it did. It would have guaranteed freedoms for women. Who are we as a nation in America? And what about in your country if it's not America? Who are we if we don't have someone to look down on? I hated what I learned in my 20s, which is every man can kick his dog. What dog deserves to be kicked? Well, if my way of seeing the world is in a hierarchy with white men on top, women down here someplace, people of color way down here, and people who are otherwise able, people who are neurodiverse, they don't deserve to exist. I studied the Brady case. I studied those horrible cases with the Supreme Court. Supreme Court of the United States said 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. We have a right to sterilize and the reproductive capability of anyone that's not up to snuff. And the way they did those IQ tests back in the day was so biased, still biased toward white men. There's a very little appreciation of emotional intelligence. Howard Gardner, 1970 something, wrote about multiple intelligences, like social emotional intelligence, like kinesthetic intelligence, like spiritual intelligence, which he changed to, what did he change that to? Something acceptable, like existential intelligence. But those intelligences, there's no acknowledgement of that in the IQ test. The IQ test is just about how effing abstract we can be. We have, in this culture in America, just given credit to people with high IQ points. That's what a genius is. Ask people who's a genius. Who are they going to say? Einstein. Would they say a woman? They'd have to think about that, wouldn't they? We'd have to think about, well, not me, because I've been working on this for years, but a genius woman? Isn't that, there's something a little bit wrong with that, right? How about a genius who's a person of color? Hmm. Richie Washington, maybe? Wasn't he a scientist? Didn't he discover things? Maybe. Always a few. Who of us knew about Paul Robeson? Paul Robeson, whose father was a slave. This man was first in his class at Rutgers University. This man was a football star, but they didn't give him credit for being a football star because he was a Black person. And this was at Rutgers, which is, of all things, now a very diverse organization. But this was back in the 20s, right? Paul Robeson, the greatest Shakespearean actor, played Iago. The greatest. He had nonstop people coming to the Shakespearean play that he was in New York City. He went abroad and he was celebrated abroad. He sang Old Man River. He sang that throughout his life. He sang songs in Russian. He sang songs in Slavic. He was a gifted, brilliant man, Paul Robeson. Look him up. And he was rejected. And he was rejected. Many of the people who were traumatized in their childhoods are returned to traumatization in their adulthood, whether they deserve it or not. Who deserves trauma? Isn't that a silly concept? And yet I was raised in a punitive family, and I laugh about it. I say, well, here's the truth. My mother was born again Baptist. That's the way it was pronounced. Baptist, not Baptist. She was born again, evangelical, hellfire and brimstone. You're going to go to hell. Hell. Must be smelling the flames. Wow. Calvinist, you're chosen or you're not. That's what my mother taught us. And then my father was Sicilian Catholic, which had a lot of the same stuff. And so my parents were the East Coast distributors of guilt. And to be a female was not a pretty thing. It was like no status, low status. And shut up and be quiet and get her out of my sight. It was really the pits. And I'm looking at the time. I want to be mindful of this, that as I've been sharing with you why we do this program as trauma survivors, for trauma survivors, and for BFFs, for people that are loving trauma survivors, because we're lovable, honey. We just don't know it. Or if we know it, we tell ourselves that can't be true. At heart, a trauma survivor is supposed to hate herself. At heart, a trauma survivor is supposed to be of service to everybody else. At heart, a trauma survivor is supposed to be terrified, terrified, terrified that we'll be annihilated. And yet, and I was on a panel with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. I worked hard to get there, and I got there, and I said to him, here's what I need to know. I want to know, with children's brain development, all that we know is that children who are traumatized have these horrible, lifelong adverse effects of being traumatized, and our brains shut down and our brains become limited, and we're going to get disease, we're not going to be able to have intimate relationships. I mean, all this stuff. I know about this. I said, I need to know, is there any brain research on children, especially between 0 and 5, that says that we also develop capacities because of the trauma? And Van der Kolk, so it's recorded someplace, he said, that's not a question I thought somebody was going to ask me. That's not one of the curated questions. Ask me another question. So I did what I could. I said to him, well, all right, so help me understand, what is it in adults then, trauma survivors, that has so many of us become creative, some creative geniuses. I mean, let's look at Maya Angelou. Let's look at Oprah Winfrey. Let's look at Barack Obama. Let's look at all of these people, Joan of Arc, all these people that had tough upbringings, and they became geniuses in their own way, gifted with people, gifted with arts, gifted with science, gifted with whatever. And he said, well, we don't know about that either. But yes, anecdotally, so many people who are traumatized become creative and artistic. So I set about researching this. And what did I find out in terms of research on children that are traumatized? I found Dr. Judith Herman. Dr. Judith Herman, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Cambridge Hospital, wrote a book worth reading, worth reading, Trauma and Recovery. And it's about trauma through systemic trauma, through terrorism, as well as individual and familial trauma. And here's what she said. Trauma surviving children have remarkable capacities, both remarkable destructive capacities, but here it is, remarkable creative capacities. And when I wrote this book, Happiness is Running Through the Streets to Find You, why the hell would a trauma survivor have named a book that? Because I believe when I take my broken heart as a trauma survivor and turn it into art, I can claim a wondrous life. It is not a life without sadness. It is not a life without fear. It is not a life without depression. And it is not a life without despair. But it is my life. And my life is worth living. And in my book, one of the ways I started out, I love this quote. Who knows this woman? I didn't know her, but she said something that mattered. She said, and her name is Emily Marutian, Maroutin, Emily Marutian. If you want to know, said Emily, if you want to know where to find your contribution to the world, look at your wounds. Look at your wounds. When you learn how to heal them, teach others. When you learn how to heal them, teach others. That's what this program is about. And I put in here it is, dedication. I dedicated this book to all children and adult children. And as you might know, adult children are the parts within us. Richard Schwartz talked about parts within us, and 12-step programs that talk about the inner children we have that have been shut down, that still are inside of us. So I dedicated this book, Happiness is Running Through the Streets to Find You, to all children and adult children enduring a love deficit. Enduring a love deficit because we did never feel loved. We never felt loved. I used to pray, please let me feel loved in every cell in my body. There are times now when I feel that, but there are so many times when I revert. My default is, you're not lovable. Who do you think you are? Dedication. Happiness is running through the streets to find you. To all children and adult children enduring a love deficit, we always deserve love. We never deserve abuse. You see, I felt that my life was going to just keep defaulting to abuse. No matter what I did, and I was an outspoken kid, I was beaten for it. When I stood up for myself, the vice principal of my Corning Free Academy was called my father, even if I did the right thing. One time I had a Miss Corwin, 8th grade English teacher. Now I was good in English. That was something I was just naturally good at. because I kept trying to understand how things worked. I kept trying, nobody was there to help me. I kept originally trying to understand, what does this word mean? What does this phrase mean? What does this person mean? What is this person saying? Ms. Corwin gave me a B. Now, that was, as I said before, totally not allowable. I knew I'd gotten an A on it, and I said, why? I had all A's. And she said, no, you didn't hand him this paper. I said, I did, and you gave me an A on it. No, you didn't. Well, I did, and I'll go find it. She, of course, got very triggered and said, you come back here at noon, and I'll have Mr. Hyde, the vice principal, back here. You come back at noon. I said, okay, because I knew I could find the paper. So I went in my desk, those wooden things at the top split up like that. I found my paper, and it was an A. It was not an A plus, it was an A, I think. And so I took it to her and I said, here's the paper that you said I didn't hand in, but I did. Mr. Hyde sat there. He was an alcoholic. I didn't know that then, but he was an abusive, sadistic man to me. Adults can read when children are vulnerable. And so he let me state my whole case about why I deserved the A. And he knew if I didn't go home with an A, I would be beaten, whatever my father felt like doing. That's what would happen. So Hyde listened. And then he looked at me. And I made my case, and the case was made, and there was the paper right there with the A on it. Incontrovertible. And it didn't matter, because Hyde said to me, you don't get it. I always back my teachers no matter what. I always back they're right, you're wrong. I always back my teachers against the children. And I've called your father. Hyde and my father were sadistic, narcissistic compatriots. I knew, even if I hadn't done anything wrong, as in that case, when my father was called, that meant that I had drawn attention to myself and I didn't bring glory to his name. So he had a right to beat me. He beat my sister, my father did, just for coming home late on a date one time. He threw her against the wall, and I can still hear the sound of her body, her like 18-year-old body being thrown against the wall downstairs, and I could hear slaps, and I could hear the hits, and there was nothing I could do. And my older sister that died, she taught me when I was 3, said, stop crying, kid, don't cry. Don't you get it? If you cry, they'll hit you harder. If you cry, they'll hit you more. If you stop crying, they won't hit you as much. So I remember literally swallowing my tears, forcing them back down, and my voice forcing it back down. And that's what I did. I didn't cry. So when my sister was being beaten, it was horrible. We shared a room, and she made her way up the stairs after she was beaten. And we didn't talk because we were not allowed to talk. We couldn't comfort each other. It was cold comfort in that bedroom. We couldn't talk, but we knew the pain. We shared the pain. My friends, we're at the end of our time. I've been honestly, from the heart, from the soul, sharing with you what it is to be a trauma survivor. And what it meant was, Holly Elissa, Bruno, you don't exist. We don't want you. You're nobody. You're disgusting. You're ugly. You're dark. You're hairy. Nobody wants you. We're stuck with you. So you work and earn your keep. My parents didn't pay for us to go to the best colleges. We had to go to the colleges where we could get in and afford them. So my sisters went to a college. It was a good college. It was Cornell, but they didn't go to the best parts of Cornell. They went to the parts of Cornell that were funded by the state. My sister Lynn had to be an agriculture major. She didn't want to be a farmer. Farmer's fine profession, but that was not what she wanted. It was what she had to do. Why? Because it was free if you were in New York State. My sister Karen was a good girl, so she did what she was told. She went to home ec school. That was free. I did not want to go to Cornell because I couldn't see myself. I wanted liberal arts. What I'm trying to say here, and I'll just close with this, is that we put ourselves, if we wanted any kind of graduate degree, we put ourselves through. I put myself through law school. I put myself through my master's degree. My sisters did that too. We paid for ourselves because we knew they wouldn't think we were worth it. We had to get a baccalaureate degree in case, and this is what they always say, just in case you have to be a teacher if something happens to your husband. That was okay. You could be a teacher. So, my friends, trauma survivors are taught worthlessness. I'm worth nothing. Trauma survivors are taught to hate ourselves, because if I can blame myself, then I can even punish myself harder than those other people that are here on earth to punish me. Maybe they won't have to punish me as much. That didn't work, but I thought it might. So this program is to share with you what it's like to be a trauma survivor and how we can help walk each other home. Denise and I, Crystal and I, Rob and I, other people who have joined me over the 5 years since this book has been published on this podcast, we have helped each other make it through. And I hope today, just by listening and hearing what my experience has been like, perhaps you've identified maybe some of this is your story. And what does it add up to? Well, it adds up to a lot of suicide, yeah. But it also adds up to somebody like me, a unique, strange, creative, original person who couldn't accept who I was told I had to be. I had to find myself. And I'm still doing that at 79. And I expect to do that as long as I breathe. And so it is a courageous life, the life of a trauma survivor. And if you are a trauma survivor, or you love one, you know one, there's a lot of hope. We can help each other. We do help each other. We can have humor together. We can comfort each other. And we know what it's like. So join us again any Monday afternoon. Come on down. I'll have friends with me. You'll be the friend. We'll talk, we'll share, and we'll look to our wounds, because when we learn to heal, we can then help others heal as well. Thank you so much for being with me. Be very kind to your very worthy self.